Brian, UFC 2 has officially been announced. We are, I don't think we're surprised by that, but we are certainly, it's good to see, whether you're a UFC fan or not. It's good to see that, the next version of the game will be coming out. Lots of directions that the next UFC game could go. So I'm interested in your take on, number one, where you think what approach they're going to take, as well as your thoughts on some of the features that have been announced for EA's upcoming Ultimate Fighting game.
Yeah, so we're coming off their first effort with UFC for summer of 2014, and that game really wasn't received well by either the hardcore fans or casuals, because casuals just, I don't think they're ever really going to get into a UFC game. It's too complicated, it's too difficult to grasp and to improve at.
And I'm gonna interrupt you right here. Like, not that I speak for everybody, I speak for me, but as a casual who wasn't into the sport, the original game definitely didn't do anything to move the needle for me personally, nor anyone else that I spoke to.
Yeah, and so that's why, throwing in the likes of a Bruce Lee, it doesn't matter. It's not going to work. It's not going to get people who are uninterested in UFC to buy a UFC game. They're just not going to do it. And they also struggled with kind of the identity of the game for that same reason, in that they made the game a little more arcadey. It lacked authenticity, and it didn't have much in the way of offline content. So the game didn't really resonate with anyone. Now, they improved it a ton in post-release updates, which I think was encouraging, because it showed that they recognized what they needed to do and did it. They corrected some of the problems that they faced with the initial release, and so that there's reason to be encouraged by that as far as this next game goes. Now, they put out the features list, and obviously the first thing we notice is Ultimate Team is here in UFC, and that's probably not a surprise, because sales for their UFC game were very disappointing compared to what they hoped to be generating. And part of that was their own doing, because the game was disappointing, but part of it also is a decline in the UFC's popularity over the last 5-6 years, where the first UFC game in 2009 from THQ sold over 1 million copies in its first month. The sequel the next year sold, I think it was around 400 and some thousand copies in its first month. The third, 2 years later, sold 300 and some thousand copies in its first month, and then EA's sold 270 or 280,000 in its first month. So it's not necessarily just, you can't just point at and say the games have gotten worse or something. There's more to it, because some of those games were really good. But there's obviously the effort to generate that digital revenue to help offset some of the lower sales and bring in that money that they're getting from other games. Now, that's a difficult one, though, because it's not a team sport. It's the first time they've tried to break in with an individual sport. Gameplay, they're trying to bring in authenticity to it, and they're doing a lot with defense and animations and physics, and that's all very important. But again, it has to be authentic to the fighter. It has to be authentic to the sport, not just in a features list, because they made the game sound very authentic, the first one, and it turned out not to be so.
Well, I'll tell you this again, not to interrupt, but I mean, it makes complete sense to have an Ultimate Team, component to this game, right? Like, and not from a cynical perspective or a snarky perspective. This is how EA makes money. I mean, this is how they make money. All of their sports games are funded, directly as a result of the revenue that they get from Ultimate Team, right? So, I mean, it makes complete sense. How they're going to do it, I have no idea. Whether it will detract from the non-Ultimate Team modes, right, will be very interesting to see. I was surprised at what I viewed as snark and cynicism of people like, oh, well, of course there's Ultimate Team. Yes, of course there is Ultimate Team. It's not a bad thing. So far, I think, with all of the games, right, whether it's EA's games or NBA 2K's game or MLB The Show, right, they all have variations on Ultimate Team. And as a guy who doesn't play them, I don't feel like I'm being gypped or, misled in any way. It's there for the people who like it, and it's not there for the people who like it. And frankly, I don't think this will be any different. It will be interesting how they put it in place, of course.
Yeah, the brief description of it makes it sound almost more like a mobile game implementation of Ultimate Team, where you've got a handful of fighters, and then you're improving them through cards. You're improving their ratings and attributes. You're improving the types of moves they can execute and their strengths. So it's a totally different formula, though, from a normal Ultimate Team, which is about just getting new players through the cards. So it'll be interesting to see whether kind of those dedicated Ultimate Team players respond to that type of system. They're putting more into offline mode, obviously, with a career mode. They have a new knockout mode, which I think could be intriguing, which is the fight only ends when someone gets knocked out. They take out some of the ground game type of stuff out of the equation, and the grappling and all that. So, and additionally, they have, I think this is important. It's not going to excite anybody, but it's important. A practice mode, different types of feedback to people who are trying to learn and improve. They didn't do a great job of it last time. I mean, they taught the game. It's one thing, we go over this sometimes. It's one thing to teach, like, here's how you play the game, but then after that, how do you get better, and how do you get accustomed to those things? And you can know the hundreds of moves you can do on a controller in a UFC game, but when you have a split second to make those decisions, most people can't do that. And it's hard to go from zero knowledge to that. And it's one of the struggles that EA and anybody who makes an MMA game has to face.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just in looking at other games like NBA 2K, like the videos that I've been making with Desar, right, where we just focus on one or two key things. NBA 2K, while in and of itself might not do a great job of teaching you or helping you learn, it does give you the tools, right? So if you go and you can go into a practice mode and you can just run the same set 2 or 3 times and get it to be like, okay, when I call this play, I know it's going to happen, and I can get this guy open, or I can set this screen. It'll be interesting if the practice mode really is that same sort of, forgiving thing where you can practice the same move 10, 15, 20 times in a row, so that it does become, muscle memory is not the right term, but so that it does become something that if you practice it 10, 15, 20 times, that when you are in that split second, you might know 2 or 3 things that you can go to. I don't think you and I are ever going to be those people that are out there that know, the games at a completely different level. But that practice arena, letting you get those 2 or 3 or 4 things down after a little while, I think it's a good move. Yeah,
it still remains inherently complicated, and I think even with a practice mode where you could do something over and over and over, the circumstances of that are always going to be different. The circumstances, what just happened, what am I facing, what are the circumstances at the moment, what are my opponent's attributes, what are my attributes as you change and use different fighters or whatever. You're rarely facing just a situation where you can sit there, think, and do something.
Yeah,
and that's one of the issues that people just have to get over. And for a lot of people, they don't ever get to that point. They give up. They'll play the demo and say, whoa, I'm never going to get this. And I can't fault them, because it takes a long time to get it. And sometimes in these games, it's just not fun at the beginning when you do have to face that.
Right. And it almost, brings the larger question to bear, which is, who are these games made for, right? Like, obviously,
well, they didn't know last time.
right.
Yeah.
Obviously, these companies want these games to get sold to more and more people. They want them to appeal to more and more people. But on the other hand, the level of depth and complexity and simulation really speaks to people that are, that are going to make this their 1 or 2 or 3 purchases of the year, right? And, it's interesting. We've had a lot of conversations about it, and I think, appealing more to the base feels to me like the better move with this kind of a game, just because, right, because of, when I talk to people who know UFC, they use language that I don't get, right? And so when I read the features coming in UFC 2, I'm like, okay, I don't know what that means, but I'll bet you people that are into UFC totally get it and totally like this. Am I right about that?
Absolutely. And it was part of the problem with the original UFC game, was that I know several people, one of them being Dylan, who contributes on Hit the Pass, who are huge UFC fans, who actually do fight themselves or have trained to fight, and they know all the intricacies of the sport. They played the game and they wanted to dump it immediately because it did not speak to them as experts, as fans. It was clearly tailored to be towards a more casual or tailored to be a little more inviting to people, but you can't get over the complication of the sport. You can't do that by making it seem simple or making everybody kind of have the same move sets or making the CPU constantly aggressive, chasing you down, never giving you a moment to breathe, which is actually the opposite of what they should have done if they were going to make it easy on people. The CPU's AI has to be dealt with, and they did a little bit with the patches. So that is the thing. You have to go after the hardcore people. You can't build a game, and we've talked about this with other series. You can't build a fan base, a game. You can't build it on a casual crowd because they will crumble, they will disappear. You need the people who support your product all the time, who are knowledgeable about the sport. And then after you get those people, that's when you reach the casual crowd, because they will follow what people find to be the people who know what they're talking about. They will follow those people who are fans of it because it becomes popular that way. So you see that with NBA 2K. It was popular with the hardcore fans well before it picked up 3 million in sales the last few years, higher than it had been. So that's the key for them, is they have to address that this time. They can't go at it and make their biggest marketing push about a Bruce Lee or about some fantasy scenario. It has to be about what people actually care about now, and their knowledge, and tapping into their knowledge of the sport and their fandom.
So when is the release date for UFC 2?
Yeah, they've only announced spring.
Okay.
And I think in retailer databases, the placeholder is March 31st, which would mean first quarter of 2016, which would probably mean February or March. But it's possible. Last time they announced it for April, and it slid to June. So it's possible it may end up later part of spring. It just have to see. It kind of fits in that window where there's no other game now, where the golf game landed last year, UFC can go this year. That's
exactly what I was going to say. So it's an important time. Like, EA looks to me like they're sort of lining up now these, biannual releases, right? Like UFC year 1, PGA Tour year 2, UFC year 3, PGA Tour year 4. So they're not going to the subscription service, which both, these kinds of games, at least theoretically lend themselves pretty well to that. But they are going to a, 2-year, platform-based approach, at least with these games, where the game that you buy day 1 will evolve over the course of 2 years, as we saw, at least, for the first year with the original UFC game as you went. So that makes sense. It gives EA a game in the first quarter every year. People, I think, like a 2-year gap between games like this. I mean, I never really felt a clamor for a Tiger Woods game every single year. And I think this might settle into a pretty nice sort of, cadence for them, so to speak.
And that's one of the challenges with a game like UFC or golf, is that, look, as much as people love new features and everything, the real reason why the majority of people buy a sports game every year, the people who buy it every year, is because of new rosters. And you don't get new, fresh rosters in a UFC game. It's 90% of those people were in the last game. Okay. In golf, they trim the roster in EA's golf game. Most golf games don't carry any licensed golfers, but they're not really adding in anybody of note, or more than 1 or 2 people of note, and changing their attributes a little bit. You've lost Tiger Woods, so he's gone.
Yep.
Maybe it brings in someone new, but that reason for buying the game, that automatically makes it fresh regardless of anything else, is gone. So when you have someone who's not a huge UFC fan, let's say they buy the first game, do I need to buy this next game? It's got all the same fighters in it. And that's the logic that a lot of people go through. Now, the good thing for UFC is, in that release window, they don't really have that much competition. It's not like the late August through mid-October period, right? It has, other than the show in March, there's nothing directly competing with a UFC game there.
And those are two very different audiences. Now, granted, there are people like Dylan, right, who we know loves the show and loves UFC, but in my sort of, in my circle of friends and coworkers and stuff, there's not a whole lot of crossover between the big baseball guys and the big UFC guys. Seems to be a different crew altogether.
Yeah, and one of the big problems with UFC at its first release was the roster was fairly weak. It was missing a lot of people. They added a lot through post-release updates as free new fighters in the game, and now they're touting that it's the largest roster ever, which makes me chuckle just because there was one game and it is the second game, and you're telling me it's the largest.
Technically, it's correct.
yeah, that's how they work it. But UFC, the first one, ended up in EA Access. You mentioned the subscription service, so I have to say this. It was in EA Access after 6 months. It came out in June. It was in EA Access Vault, free to play for anybody with a subscription, in December of last year, which astonished me that it went in there that quickly, because they had no way. They didn't have an Ultimate Team in there. Now they'll have an Ultimate Team in there. When it does reach the subscription service, they'll be able to maybe generate even more digital revenue out of that when additional people get into the game and decide, hey, I didn't spend any money really technically for this game on its own. Maybe I'll spend some money in Ultimate Team.
Well, Brian, we got the cover announcement, of course, that Ronda Rousey is your featured athlete, and she wound up losing pretty significantly, although I guess every loss in UFC is a significant loss because of the nature of the sport, but certainly not expected, and I would say not anticipated from the folks at UFC 2 and EA Sports.
Well, yeah, it's a significant loss, more so because of the way it happened. Now, if it was a lucky punch or lucky kick, or it went to judge's decision, that's one thing. But Rousey got demolished. I mean, from start to finish, she got demolished. And so EA Sports, they made the announcement of Rousey being on the cover. It's kind of their lead cover representative. They made that Friday, and then she lost on Saturday. And I guarantee you, for a couple of reasons, guarantee you EA was counting on her winning that, or fully expecting her to win it. Because Rousey had already announced that she was going to take a bit of a break from UFC and film movies for the next 6 months. Okay, so they were counting on her winning, and then they could capitalize on, hey, we have the undefeated champ on the cover. Nobody's even in the same league as her. Nobody can even contend with her. There's people debating whether she could beat men in boxing matches. There's people, all these things that go like way beyond UFC. Plus, she has reach on in the entertainment world. She's going to be starring in movies. She's on she would be on TMZ all the time. She would be on Entertainment Tonight. Who knows? Rousey would be everywhere basically. That's not going to happen now. I mean, it's funny. I looked today. There was a story on TMZ, and it was Ronda Rousey coming back from the fight, and she's walking through the airport covered up, won't show her face. And I'm like, that's not who you want on the cover of your game, or representing your game, as someone who won't even show their face anymore.
Well, to be fair, she's probably not showing her face because her nose is probably somewhere over her eyeball, and her chin might be where her cheek used to be, right? I mean,
regardless,
it's a different situation.
Yeah, no, and that I know that. I jokingly framed it that way, but there is a serious question now about whether she is going to be in the spotlight, in the public domain at all for the next 6 months, because she still has these movies to film, and there's no talk of there being a rematch or some other fight for her before the UFC game comes out in March, April, May, June, wherever it falls in there. She's not going to fight again before there. It's even possible, once they medically check her out, that she would be restricted from fighting for the next 6 months, regardless of whether she wants to or not. And that's not really, you want somebody who's relevant at the time to be on the cover promoting your game, because they're also going to be in the news for other reasons, and that you get your mention of the game alongside them all the time. Here's Rousey coming to a talk show, and they're going to mention that she's on the cover of a video game. You know, it's a big deal, and now she's not going to be in those situations to promote the game that EA was counting on. It's a big loss for EA, their marketing plan, and even stuff like they're going to have to go in and correct any marketing materials that they had been working on, or in-game art that might have her with the belt on, or commentary that would be mentioning her undefeated record. There's a lot of stuff that actually changes because of this that they probably weren't counting on.
All right. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you on that, but she was the champion for a long time. Okay. So her and the belt, you know, were synonymous for a while, right? So it's not as if she never won the championship. She held it for a while. Another thing is, before the fight, I couldn't have told you the name of anybody else in UFC, really, other than Ronda Rousey. And I'm not like, you know,
well, that's the key.
I'm not even joking, right?
Yeah.
So after the loss, to me, I mean, most of the great fighters, and I had to draw a correlate to boxing because that's what I really understand. Most of the great fighters of all time lost. In fact, I don't even know, was Rocky Marciano like one of the few undefeated, great fighters? I mean, almost every champion lost. Muhammad Ali lost. Joe Frazier lost. Mike Tyson lost. Joe Louis lost. Sugar Ray Leonard lost. Marvin Hagler lost. And you can go on and on and on. Ronda Rousey losing one time does not have a tremendously negative impact in my mind. Frankly, I think she's so well known for who she is. She has elevated the awareness beyond, oh, she's that person who's never lost. It's just people see Ronda Rousey like, whoa, that's that incredibly tough, strong woman who is great at what she does. Losing once versus being undefeated, to me, I don't think has that same tremendously negative domino effect I think that you believe it does.
So you're correct in some ways, I think, and it's just that it's more about the timing. I don't think this makes her this would elevate somebody else to that stature where you'd say, well, that's the face of UFC now. She probably still is, and they probably still would have wanted her for the cover, even with a loss on her record. It's more just the timing of it.
Oh, yeah.
In that they made the announcement touting everything about her and how big a deal it was, and then she goes on to lose the next day. Plus, if she disappears, like I said, for 6 months now, when the game is coming out and when they're during their promotional cycle, that's the worst possible situation for them, is to not have her around and promoting the product. And it becomes more difficult to do that from a stature of, now she's coming off a loss. Does she even have a match scheduled? Is she dodging a rematch, or is she, are her priorities otherwise? Because a lot of people might say all this other stuff on the side is what led to her losing in the first place. So it's just the difficulty that comes with fitting those pieces together that EA didn't anticipate having to do before.
I agree with you there. However, it could be spun in a different way, right? Like we knew, based upon what she said, that she was going to take some time off after this fight, win or lose, right? And the game comes out, when is it, March or April, or has there been a specific date announced yet? There hasn't, right? Spring, right? So to me, if there were a time for her to go away for a while, it would be now, because you've still got 4, 5, 6 months until the game comes out. What as opposed to if she had lost like 30 days before the game came out, right? So now I'm thinking, right, and I don't know how any of this stuff works, so I could be completely wrong, but now I'm thinking it's like, okay, Rousey disappears for a while. Nobody needs to care about UFC 2 for a while, right? It's the holiday season is coming up. After that, it's a little bit of the dead time. Yeah. Then when the game is starting to come out, maybe that's when she sort of comes back from her, I don't want to say hiatus because she'll be doing other things, but then perhaps timed possibly, and it's in UFC's best interest, like the sport as well as EA Sports, perhaps you time her first fight or her comeback fight to be a week or two after the launch of UFC 2, right? so that you're not set up with this second, potential loss, but you almost build up the hype. Wow, Rousey's coming back. UFC 2 is coming out. This could be worked in that direction, which could potentially be to UFC 2's benefit.
Yeah, there's uncertainty there whether that would happen, I think, is the issue. You could capitalize on, talk of a rematch or redemption type of story, right? Those are great. People love those things. I just don't know if timing-wise that's actually going to match up with the video game, and that's the concern that EA would have now. And again, I want to at least state that I'm not suggesting that this is going to make fewer people buy the video game, right? Mm-hmm. It's that the awareness around the video game is reduced when you don't have websites writing about Ronda Rousey because she's off doing movies, or you don't have her making appearances on TV shows or filming commercials, or who knows what other priorities she has in line right now, or what she's agreed to do for EA already. And that's also EA, and EA, maybe they overpaid for her because they paid for somebody they expected to be considered at a certain stature. But ultimately, it doesn't change how good the game's going to be, or whether someone who's interested already in UFC is going to buy it or not. But it's the people who don't know about it. And you've seen EA try to go and get those people who don't know about UFC with stuff like Bruce Lee and various other marketing tactics. And that's why it was such a big deal to get Rousey, is because she reaches more people than anybody else can in UFC. And there's no question about that. And she probably still does, but she has to be available for all of that.